for national space capabilities. And may I invite our distinguished chair for this session onto stage, Mr. Radhakrishnan, Durairaj, CMD, NSIL. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Also inviting our eminent moderator, Mr. Shashank Tripathi, former advisory partner, PwC, advisor, Aerospace and Defense. A warm welcome to you, sir. I have the privilege also of inviting our eminent speakers. I invite Mr. B.M. Raghavendra, Senior Deputy General Manager, Missiles and Aerospace Business, L&T. A warm welcome, sir. I invite Mr. Anurag Garg, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer, Thales, India. I invite Dr. Subba Pavuluri, CMD, Ananth Technologies Limited, and Lieutenant General AKS Chandele, President, Defense, Internal Security and Public Safety, Geospatial World. A very warm welcome to you. So, ladies and gentlemen, the topic for the session is leveraging industry base for national space capabilities. And the time duration for the session is approximately 1 hour 20 minutes, which includes the opening and closing remarks by the chair. And the session will be moderated by Mr. Shashank Tripathi. And may I hand over to you, sir, to kindly carry forward the proceedings.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege and a pleasure to be here. I'll invite the chair to make his opening remarks, and then we'll proceed with the panel.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Radhakrishnan Durairaj. I'm the Chairman and Managing Director of New Space India Limited, which is the commercial arm of Indian Space Research Organization, fully owned Government of India company under Department of Space. Now, the topic of our session, leveraging industry base for national space capability, I feel it is one of the most apt subject for which New Space India Limited itself was created. Why I say this is because when our company was created way back in 3 years back, the mandate of the company was, in addition to doing the commercial space business for ISRO, the major driving factor for us was how do we encourage the Indian industries in taking up the space-related activities in India. So what are the driving forces that NSIL would do to ensure that we have a good manufacturing base for the space activities in India? Now, when I am looking this particular activity in terms of leveraging Indian space capability, if you look at the space activities, basically, I think like everybody talks about, it is related to the upstream activity where we talk about the building satellites, launches, and ground segments and all those things. There is a bit of a mid-segment activity where actually the services are provided, and then there is a downstream activity which gets into more of the applications and the user terminals, chipsets, and all those kind of things. But I think one thing what we need to really understand is India being one among the 6 spacefaring nations in the world, we have the inherent advantage of being the big contributor to the upstream part. We have the capability of building satellites and launch vehicles, and also some of the mid-segment elements. So it is time that we really encash on this, because building up the downstream, like for example, the applications and other things, though commercially it may look a very lucrative thing, I think even a non-spacefaring nation can perform those particular activities. So I would like to say the kind of effort, I would like to hear from the other speakers as well. What is the kind of opportunity that is available for the industrial base for contributing to the upstream portion of the activity, and also to an extent, how the downstream activities also could be looked into. Now, when we look at the, in India, when you look at the space capabilities of our nation, I know, and everybody will agree, I think the repository of space technology lies in Indian Space Research Organization, which has been built almost over 6 decades now. So I think it is the right time for us to see how do we ensure that this repository of technologies and also the facilities, infrastructures which are available with ISRO, how it is made available to the Indian industry partners, not only for meeting the national programs, but also maybe in the coming years, also meeting the international market. I think this is one of the biggest advantage that we have in India, where the capabilities and the infrastructures established over several decades could come very handy for the more aspiring startups or maybe even in the industry players who have been working in this field for several decades now. So I'm looking at this particular activity in 2 phases. Say, for example, in the area of launch vehicles, when you're looking at it, as you know, I think maybe the Indian industries have been contributing for building the rockets, but their responsibilities was very limited in the sense they were mostly entrusted with the responsibility of building parts, components, subsystems, and to some extent the systems. Now, here is the new direction that we brought in from New Space India Limited, where we are ensuring that the entire manufacturing of the rockets can it be done through the industry. So we are thrusting the Indian industry with more responsibility of taking up the responsibility of building the entire rockets, wherein the confidence and the knowledge base that they would acquire by undertaking this activity will play a much bigger role in increasing the throughput of the particular industry. Now, if you look at the launches that we are talking about, one of the two primary launches that New Space India Limited operates, which are basically the ISRO launchers, is the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, which has done almost 50 plus launches so far, and very, I would say, not only commercially competitive sort of vehicle in the international market. The current production rate, if you look at it, we are looking at something like 4 to 5 or 5 to 6 vehicles per year. But by giving to the industry, whether if the requirement comes to something like 10 to 12 vehicles per year to be delivered, I'm sure if the industry base knows the know-how of manufacturing this rocket and integrating the entire stages of the rocket, the days will not be far when we'll be able to manufacture 10 to 12 rockets per year. So this is one aspect. So New Space India Limited, you would have read recently, we have contracted with Hindustan Aeronautics Limited and L&T. I think it was a long dream for us for many years that how do we have been always talking about moving the launch vehicle production to the industry, but never happened. But I think we took a very bold step in ensuring that the right industry is identified who have the capability and wherewithal and also the will to manufacture this. So we have contracted with HAL and L&T. We have one colleague from L&T also available here, who will be manufacturing 5 rockets. So I think this, I would say, is one big step as far as leveraging the Indian space capability at the industry level. The second one is, it's not only one type of launcher that you're looking at it. Once this exercise has been done, we are also looking at how do we move our next operational launcher, which is the GSLV Mark III. You would have recently seen a week back when we launched our 36 OneWeb satellite. There has been a tremendous query from the international community for using this rocket for doing a lot of their launches. World over, you may be reading, there are a lot of LEO broadband communication satellite constellations that are coming up. Everybody would like to launch 30, 40 satellites in one go. Rockets are not available in the present market. If you look at it globally, you know, the rockets who can do this kind of launches is primarily, you have the rockets from US, then we had some Russian rockets, and then the Indian. Because of the current geopolitical situation, I think one of the other second option, what I mentioned, also becomes little now not in a very good position. So we are left with only, I would say, the one launcher from US, Europe, and then the Indian market. And our capability to demonstrate this kind of launches in the very first go, I think I'm for sure that many of the international community would like to appreciate and understand and realize the technical and professional capability that exists in India for doing this. So I'm going to see a very big market, at least from starting from another 2 to 3 years from now, where I'm looking at something like 6 to 7 GSLV Mark III rockets to be manufactured through the Indian industry. So we are now considering maybe in a couple of weeks' time or maybe in the coming months, how do we enable the Indian industry to manufacture more GSLV Mark III rockets, because we should be always in the race. The rocket should be available when it is required. I cannot take an action maybe 2 years down the line when the people will, the market will go off. So this is one big opportunity, and I'm sure this particular launches, when we give especially the launches to an international community, in addition to generating a lot of business in the Indian market, the first and foremost that I see from the perspective of a country is it brings in a lot of foreign exchange revenue to the country, you know, in the millions and millions of dollars that will come into the country. It's a big asset for the national development also. So this is one area which I'm seeing will have a tremendous growth potential. So this is in the area of launch vehicles. We are very clear what are the directions we are planning to go forward. Now the other segment, which is also very important, is when you talk about building satellites, say for example, anything that comes to our mind when it is building bigger satellites or maybe state-of-the-art satellites in India, it's nothing but ISRO. I know a lot of startups and new companies are coming up who are planning to build these nano and maybe micro satellites in the future. So the easiest thing that we could do from NSIL perspective to honor the mandate that we have is to transfer the technology from ISRO back to the industry, which we have successfully done now. Our microsatellite platform, which is the IMS-1, small satellite bus technology, has been transferred to the industry. In fact, when we wanted to do this particular activity, we were wondering whether more than 2 or 3 companies will take it. But when we really floated the RFI kind information asking for the interest from the industry, we are very happy to see that at least 14 to 15 companies came forward. And we tried to keep the cost at the barest minimum possible, which the industry can, even a startup could afford it. And this has been successfully done. And very shortly, I think we are in the final stage of concluding the transfer agreements with some of the industry people who are really looking for. This is one area of the activity. And in the future, we're also seeing the IMS-2 bus, which is 450 kg platform, how we can go to the industry. But I'm just talking this particular aspect because the technology know-how that exists in ISRO, how we are going to migrate to the industry so that the system grows. Additionally, there are a lot of technologies from outside also is coming to India, especially in the area of nanosatellites and microsatellites. I think that is one area where we need to encourage industries, and NSIL also would be happy to cooperate or maybe have kind of some partnerships with the private people who are ready to build the satellites, because we have an inherent advantage of being the commercial arm of ISRO, and with a lot of our contacts, commercial contracts with the international community, I think it will be also possible for us to bid in the international market some of the constellation proposals that are going to come up. Together with the satellites being built by a private company, we provide the launch solutions. I think in-orbit delivery solutions in partnership with NSIL and the private companies will be the most forthcoming thing that I think that should happen. In addition, one more area that I am seeing now in light of all these constellations coming up globally, once people start getting especially in the broadband area, once people start getting the landing rights in India, I know it's not the services that has to be rendered, the requirement of having this user terminals, chipsets, modems, a lot of electronic components is going to be a big, huge market. I know there is a lot of companies in India who have the expertise of building this kind of specific systems. So we are also trying to explore with some of our international partners, especially the broadband constellation people, how to enable Indian, I would say, the manufacturing sector, especially in the electronics area, how to bring in those companies to India to have a tie-up with our Indian partners so that all the user terminals, chipsets, modems could be manufactured within India as part of Make in India program, supplied for the Indian consumer, at the same time make a manufacturing hub in India so that the international community also benefits from this. So these are some of the areas in the upstream and downstream which we are looking at it. I know there are a lot of topics to be discussed on this particular aspect. We have a lot of panelists in this session. I will leave the floor to Mr. Tripathi to conduct, and then maybe we'll be ready for question and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I would also want to congratulate you and NSIL because of the launch of 36 satellites just a day before Diwali. There couldn't have been a bigger firecracker for the country. So please, a big round of applause to you. It's a singular achievement, and thanks to your leadership for doing that. Can I request some of the people in the corner to shift a bit more in the center, because we'd like people to be in front of the panel, if that's fine. I have the privilege of introducing this session again and of giving you the flow of what we want to do today. I will open up by giving a few of my own remarks to set the stage for the Q&A. I will then introduce the panelists more than what has already been done in the introduction pamphlet. And then I will set off with a set of questions which will last for about 40 odd minutes. And then I'd like to open it up for the audience for taking 3 or 4 questions also. And then I'd be very keen that the chairman concludes this session by giving his remarks and some thank you note. So the session is called Leveraging Industry Base for National Space Capabilities. And it's being conducted at a time which is very topical for India. India is celebrating its 75th anniversary. We are soon going to be not only the largest democracy, we will be the largest country on this planet. And this year itself, we have become the 5th largest economy of the world, apart from installing an Indian origin Prime Minister in UK. We therefore believe that we are at an inflection point, and this inflection point requires the capabilities of the space sector to propel us forward. We want to make sure that the development needs that our Prime Minister and other leaders of this country have envisaged over the next 25 years has got space central to that theory. And therefore, upstream space, midstream space, and downstream space, all 3 are very relevant for the future of this country, so that not only are we a space-faring nation, but as we have often discussed, every citizen of this country thinks about space as their own domain. To give you some quantification, today the global industry is about 390 billion. We are a mere 8 billion, which is approximately 2%. We believe it's our vision, or at least it's a vision of many people in the space industry, to take that 2% to 10% over the next 10 years, which means that we have to be 80 billion industry, which will be 23% growth rate, which is entirely possible because the country itself is growing at 6 to 7 to 8% after the COVID crisis. In order to do that, this panel hopefully will discuss capabilities which exist today, which can be harnessed. Second, capabilities which are existing today but have not been harnessed can be quickly deployed. And indeed, the most important, can we bring in new capabilities which are required for us to become a global leader in space? If we have to achieve 10% global space, how shall I say, market share, then that will require a fairly number of new capabilities so that we are able to. And also a point which was made by a previous panelist I really liked, we have to do this sustainably. We are a country which has always believed in organic growth. We have never believed in disrupting the planet in order that humanity takes a rise. We have to carry the planet with us. So with that, I would like to say that today's discussion will highlight all of these 3. I'd like to introduce some of the panelists so that we can take on the question and answers which happens afterwards. And I'm really privileged to chair this session today. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Subba. He's, of course, needs no introduction at this forum because in some ways he has created the forum. He's the president of SIA-INDIA and the CMD of Ananth Technologies. He founded Ananth Technologies in 1993, which is the first private industry to set up assembly, integration, and testing facilities of satellite and launch vehicles in India. Thank you very much for your leadership, sir. I'd like to introduce Anurag Garg. Anurag is the Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer of Thales. He's also a part of the country's executive team, contributing to Thales's growth ambition through the definition, execution of country and BU strategy. We all know that Thales is a global leader, both in defense and space. Welcome, Anurag. I'd like to welcome General Chandele, who retired as the Director General of Electronics and Mechanical Engineers, which is a very, very significant position. And he's now associated with the Geospatial and Electronics industry post-retirement. Thank you and a warm welcome, sir.
Thank you. And I'm here by accident. One panelist didn't turn up.
So I think he's explaining why I'm reading off another script, that it was only a surprise last-minute entry, which we are very welcoming. I'd like to, Sri Ramesh Shankaran, he's not here. Yeah. Mr. Sri B.M. Raghavendran, I happened to share another panel recently with him. He's a business leader in one of the largest Indian conglomerates, Larsen & Toubro. He has 2 decades of experience working on various missile and space programs for domestic and international clients. And we all know that whenever L&T does something, it does it very seriously. And therefore, very warm welcome to you as well. So what I'll do is I'll kick off with a few questions. As I said, I have a timer on, so I want to make it sure that we are at 1:40 when I open it up to the audience, and hopefully we'll have an enjoyable discussion. I'd pose the first question to Dr. Subba Rao. You've seen the space sector grow over the last many years. You're a veteran. But what are the capabilities you believe we've already built in the system, and what has Ananth specially done for that?
Thank you, sir. Perhaps to trace the career in order to see what work can do, perhaps I have to go back into the history. I was a startup company about 30 years ago, in the sense that, the startups you're talking about today, I was a startup about 30 years ago. I was also working as a scientist in the Indian space program. And one of the important things that we noticed was after we launched the first IRS satellite, India Remote Sensing Satellite, we found that the satellite can be made use of for many applications area, like water resources management and irrigation related, soils related, like various applications on that. Then we conducted one seminar called IRS Utilization Program, how the IRS data could be made use of by various departments in the government of India. We found that the data could be effectively used for their planning purposes on that. So one of the recommendations of the seminar at the time was that you must commercialize space products. That's how we started the entire idea. So in order to do the commercialization of space products, what is to be done? I can't do that only within ISRO. So why not go out and do that? So that's how I started my career. And when I submitted my first report at that time to Professor U.R. Rao, the chairman of ISRO, he asked me, what's the problem? You have a good career here. Why do you want to leave? The scenario at that time was, do everything from within ISRO, from ISRO side. So we started with the applications area on the remote sensing. In the 1990, I started that. At that time, just to give a rough up, what can be done, what we thought those days in that. If we have to map the entire country at a resolution that's available with IRS at that point of time, how many number of satellites do you need for the country? Because we want to make the remote sensing data as a part of the planning, the governance. That's both in terms of, the development activity, also the governing activity, both of that. So from that angle, I made, some calculations roughly that we need a lot of satellites. In order to put those satellites into space, how many launch vehicles do you need? That also, mind-boggling numbers were getting it. It was a time when we are not talking about the high resolution, like, 1 meter, 5 meter resolutions of today. That time was about 22-meter resolution. So from that angle, we started creating the facilities also onto that. And subsequently, when we got into the applications to launch vehicle area, we found that there are also a lot of opportunities because many launch vehicles to be done. One good thing about ISRO always has been that 80% of the budget is always given off to the industry to develop certain things on that. That's how L&T was supported, Garg was supported, like companies like us supported in these various programs. And I must say that at the same time, the ISRO empowers the company, empowers in terms of the equipment that is needed, empowers in terms of the manpower that is needed by training them onto that. And after training, they qualify the company and they started giving activity to them. That's how the ecosystem is created by ISRO at that point of time. It was very encouraging for us. And in the process, I contributed so far for 90 satellites that ISRO has built and 70 launch vehicles ISRO has built and extensively into applications area. Just for the case of, don't mind for my repetition, space program has 3 defined components. One is the launch vehicle, satellite, and the third one is applications. We are involved into all 3 segments of Indian space program. That's how my journey started on that. In the process, we created a lot of equipment, a lot of infrastructure that is required on that. Today, I have a facility in Hyderabad, another facility in Bangalore for the satellite building, and the other facility in Trivandrum for launch vehicle-related activities on that. This is briefly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that pioneering work. Mr. Raghavendra, India is a global leader as it is, and the space domain courtesy ISRO, especially in the upstream side. What are the capabilities the private sector already has to support that effort, and what more can be done?
Yeah, this will appear to be a repetition of what Dr. Subba just spoke about. Like he shared, about 80% of the ISRO's work has already been with the industry since not last couple of years, but since last 5 decades. That is almost right from its inception. So if you look at what industry has been making, is making subsystems for the launch vehicle, for the satellites, that's at the component and subsystem level. But industry also has been contributing towards developing those key facilities that are required by ISRO, like developing a hypersonic wind tunnel or a trisonic wind tunnel, or develop a high altitude test facility, which are key for testing certain key technologies that are developed. So ISRO has always been hand-holding the industry in developing various technologies across the entire space domain. Having said that, one very key capability that industry developed on its own is an ability to scale up. So ability to scale up space-grade production is not a child's play. It's definitely involving a lot of nuances and intricacies that are very, very important to be looked upon. So even before the space sector opened up, there was a need which was spelled out, like Dr. Subba mentioned. There's a huge increase in the number of launches. ISRO centers like VSSC asked industry to create a capacity for having 12 launches. So, sir, I would like to bring out, industry has already created this kind of a capacity today. Of course, there has been a slowdown in the last couple of years. But if you look at the basic capability which is required for manufacturing is already existing within the industry, and industry is able to meet this kind of a demand going further.
But I just want to push back a bit. I mean, both of you seem to indicate it's all very rosy, but tell us a bit more about 1 or 2 things that could have been done better or what can be done better. I mean, specifically to you.
If we really look at the new environment that's coming up, which is opening up of the space sector, where industry is expected to play at an end-to-end role in space. So if you look at the last history of so many years, this need was never felt, because it was always a contract coming from ISRO, which the industry responded to. So there was never a need for industry to create a capability of design, or system design, or system integration capability. Today that need is there. If you really look at, now we are trying to bridge this gap, and we are trying to introduce processes for making this gap fill. For example, let me just try to bring out. So I've talked about PSLV. It was very clearly identified that industry can do it today, and it has to be given to the industry. But if you really look at the space ecosystem itself, which is moving so fast, time is the essence. So we took about 3 years. From the time it was conceptualized, it has to come to the industry till the placement of the order. Of course, by all parlance, if you look at in defense, it will take about 8 to 10 years. From that perspective, doing for the first time, hats off. But still, this time is the essence. This kind of duration is something which is not acceptable, or probably the market will go away. So we need to think about some innovative systems which under the government rules, which needs to be brought in, where industry can come in and participate. It should not take such a long time. We should look at what has happened in the US or what has happened in other countries on how they have quickly brought in the private industry and crashed this time. And that's how, if you look at how the various private industries and various other space economies which are growing, is basically because of the impetus from the government and the processes which were put in place to quickly bring them on board.
Good, great point that you're saying that we can be more agile. General, I'd like to come to you.
Can I add a point over here? Yeah. See, we agree with what all has been said, but having a little idea of the electronics component in the industry, I think the capability of manufacturing of space-grade electronic components, we need to work on that. Although we know that the semicon, we are taking a good initiative and all, but it'll be 5 years more by the time things are on the production line. ISRO is famous over the decades for hand-holding its vendors, suppliers, but the way supply chains can be disrupted today with pandemic or with, strife in the regions around us, we should be totally self-reliant in space-grade electronic components. I think the minister also mentioned a little about this in the morning.
Yeah.
That's
But sir, just let me carry on that question. So when you say that there is always, and I'm maybe being slightly deliberately provocative, there's always a distance between what you say and how it gets done. How do you bridge that gap? Because this electronic, may I say, famine that we have to really get this sorted in the next few years. It cannot take 5-10 years. So how do we do that?
Yeah, so, well, in the interim, you have to keep the supply chains going as they were and probably develop more flexible supply chains. But to develop our own industry, we need to incentivize our partners in the industry, give them tax breaks or developmental funding for that. We have two big associations in the electronics component sphere. One is ELSINA and one is ISA. So they have about 300 companies. ISA has got a little lesser number of companies on board. So the space sector should identify which are the components and prioritize these are required and help in their development, incentivize them. That's my recommendation.
I'll come back to you on a defense question, but I'll go to Anurag now. On the same question, Anurag, I mean, you are from a French company, although it's global now. What do you see other nations do to compress that time, to find that agility that Raghavendra was talking about?
Thank you, Shashank. See, so, I mean, Thales has been there in India for 70 years, so we are pretty much a local company now, and that's our strategy wherever we go. We're pretty much entrenched in the local ethos, the local ecosystem, not just to treat that country as a market, but also to ask ourselves what that country can do for us in the global context. So I think that strategy has really worked for us where we go, and I'll answer that in two parts. One is that wherever we've gone, we've tried to forge partnerships and more formalized partnerships like joint ventures. If I take the example of a JV we have in the US, it's called Black Sky. We have a JV with them, LeoStella, through which we manufacture very light optical satellites for Earth observation, which are launched in a constellation, which then Black Sky manages and offers as service. So this is, and then it's supported by the local government by, supporting them through contracts, and rest of the capacity is then for Black Sky to sell globally. So this is kind of a very symbiotic model where we have formed a JV with a private company, which then is getting business from government. The other example is, for example, in Italy, where we formed a joint venture with the Italian Space Agency, where the Italian Space Agency is invested, and we have a JV Telespazio, which then has formed a company called EGEOS to manufacture radar satellites for Earth observation, and a similar model kind of works. So I think this is one dimension to that how we can forge partnerships to then do TOT, to do local code development, and form formal partnerships to do it. The other is to accelerate that point. We do not believe in TOT as, sending a file and people can read and that's a technology and they don't know how to build on top of it. We do TOT in a manner that helps people set up space infra. People spoke about that we are very good in launches when it comes to private sector, but when we are talking about satellites or electronics, we still have that distance to go. So we have demonstrated our ability to do that kind of transfer of knowledge, transfer of technology in a way that we train people to do it and do local code development, because that way that TOT sticks and then you can, dwell upon it. We have helped countries, and companies in Brazil and South Korea to develop AIT facilities and bring in some best practices, which then they can use repeatedly. So a lot of this helps accelerate than rather reinventing the wheel, to sort of say that how we can suddenly get better at it and then build upon it.
It's also fair, Anurag, I just want to remain with you, that the space industry in Europe arguably is more private-led, whereas here ISRO has been the dominant player and I think has done an excellent job. But how do you then arrange the affairs with the public sector, which sometimes sovereign has to invest in R&D, especially cutting-edge high-end technology? Do you have any insights, and you may not have, but do you have any insights as to how France and Thales or other countries in Thales are doing it?
So I may not be able to answer it through my knowledge about this, but let me tell you the overall framework, how it happens. Now, if you take Thales, for example, we do €1 billion of self-funded R&D every year. So that, and we are a 17 billion euro company. So that's kind of I'll not say a benchmark, but kind of a handle for us to say that what does it take for a company like Thales to be ahead in our game, if you were. Now, beyond that, there are a lot of sovereign programs for which we get funding in France, in Italy, in Germany, in US, in UK, in Australia, for the sovereign programs that those countries want us to drive locally. So it's always a combination of these two, but it has to be a combination. You cannot always rely on government funding. You have to demonstrate your ability, your appetite, your vision for where you want to go, and the government will support at the end of the day. And I think what Mr. Radhakrishnan spoke about, I think we already have that legacy. There is already a framework through NSIL to do that TOT. So I think that can really improve the business case, because companies need not invest so much in R&D. Once they demonstrate that ability, I'm sure NSIL will be open to, doing that TOT. And also, to leverage facilities of ISRO, because some of these testing equipment, etc., are very expensive. So that way, if you come back to India, we can really, shortchange that process of forcing companies to invest in R&D singularly, leverage that, and then only invest where it's actually required.
Great. Dr. Subba, this talk about 1 billion out of 17 billion being invested by Thales. So the private sector here is mature enough to make that investment. When do you see, and I guess this can be answered by any one of you, when do you see the private sector saying, okay, it's about time we also match, maybe it's 30-70 rather than 50-50, R&D investment, and is it already happening?
Yeah, perhaps I would like to take it up, your question, from the point which you left earlier, the rosy picture that was given earlier. That I would like to match that with the subsequent. See, the picture that have been presented by ISRO that has happened, they have met the demands that happened to be there at that point of time by ISRO. So therefore, the ISRO built the industry infrastructure in the country. At the same time, they also went on building the development of the launch vehicles, and also building of the satellites, and also the scientific experimentation in the space in terms of building up some scientific satellites, etc., that type of things into it. So that gave rise to a lot of infrastructure that was created in the country, support systems completely. Now, as the demand is growing in the country, the needs are growing, and as the government is receding its investments from the government sector and wants the private responsibility, private will take the responsibility like any other sector on that. And as you know, from 1991 onwards, there is a lot of liberalization happened in various sectors in the country, like infrastructure related or communication related or whatever, a lot of liberalization happened in that. But somehow the government, that government did not feel that, perhaps did not recognize the importance of the space sector towards the space economy in this country. Now, the present government recognizes it fully, and now the responsibility they passed on besides ISRO to the other private industries also. And as you know, very name of ISRO, if you expand it further, Indian Space Research Organization, is not an Indian Space Operational Organization, research organization. So therefore, what they want, the present government wanted is to confine itself to the research and development, and they have the responsibility to the agencies outside the government, like ours or anybody. And NSIL will become the kind of the bridge between the private organization, the operation of the various things, and technology transfers. That is the kind of that NSIL is on that. Now, the only thing that we miss the bus from ISRO side is building up the small satellites from the very beginning. Always, we're focusing on the larger satellites on that. Whereas the rest of the world moved towards the smaller satellites, which can be replaced easily. They know that type of scenario on that. Now, the private industry in the country has to match up with that requirement on that. Now, here is a scenario today. The taxpayers' money need not be used for working anything on the space-related activities. The private institutions can put their own money or bring in the money from venture capital, or from the banking systems, or whatever, like in the communications, like infrastructure, like any other area in the country. So therefore, today, the competitive levels of the industry in India is going to be much higher, and India can become the global manufacturing hub. Again, I take a comparison with the auto industry in the country. Many of the foreign companies, they're manufacturing the cars in this country. At the same time, they're also exporting from this country. That is the kind of scenario that's going to be created in the space industry also. We strongly believe that India can become the manufacturing hub for the satellites. It can become the launch vehicle hub. And India can support the rest of the Europe, rest of the America, whatever, that's the kind of scenario. What you are talking about the SpaceX today elsewhere, that SpaceX, many of them can be created in this country itself, and we can do it. See, just give you another example. You take in a satellite or the whatever, 70% will be towards the components or something else, which can be sourced globally or internally. Rest of the 30% or 30 to 40% is the human ability to do the job. That's where we are going to be cheaper. And in the process, the bandwidth which are going to supply to the, the common man, that's where, that has to be economical. So therefore, India is very economical in this area, and we're going to be further on that.
Oh, great, very comprehensive answer.
Yeah, so I would like to draw one more perspective from what he shared. Your question was, when is the R&D investment going to come in from the private sector? So first, people have to see where is the money coming from. That means where is the business coming from? Today, we are at a phase where we know for sure that there is business somewhere, but where it is something people are searching about. I feel that there needs to be a correlation of the national space demand first. And we need to have a very serious effort towards collating this demand and making this business available and visible. That's one. Second point, which I would like to bring out, like what has happened in the defense sector. I'm sorry, I'm bringing it back every time because I have got some parallels to draw from that. When the demand is very clear in the defense sector, private industry made significant investments there. So from being a major importer of arms yesterday, today we have started exporting defense solutions. So that's going to happen. And I'm sure if that kind of a business visibility is coming, R&D investments will definitely happen. Even though some industries have started investing in R&D even before they see the business today. But there is an effort which is required towards bringing this demand on table and making it visible.
Yeah, no, that's great. General, I want to come to the question of...
Can I first add a little to what has been discussed? You see, I totally agree that we should strategize a national plan for what we require 25 years ahead of us, right? So, if you recollect when the present Prime Minister took over, within a month, he attended the launch at Sriharikota, and then immediately the Cabinet Secretary wrote to each of the central ministries and the state governments, giving the Prime Minister's directions that please come up with a plan of how space is going to be used to improve governance and to improve delivery in your respective ministries and respective states. And the 3 weeks time given, come up with a plan, will be discussed in 2 weeks. And there was a flurry of activity. Every ministry was, talking to experts and trying to find out what they should be doing in the space sector, right? Now, as a result of that, we should have crystallized, and I'm sure ISRO would be aware of what each of the ministries, because it has to be developed in conjunction with ISRO. So what exactly each of the ministries or the state governments require. So if you have a comprehensive requirement for the next 25 years, and you can prioritize that in terms of what you need immediately and what can be in a little longer time frame, so then the private industry can also look at opportunities. Even when my colleague was mentioning about L&T participating in defense now and putting the money there, I've been with them on their defense board for 7 years, and that there were times when we were worried that unless orders come to us, how can we put our money there, right? Because actually a private company is working for profit. So it's not be fair to ask the private industry to go into R&D at that level where the revenue stream will not accrue to them in the near future.
No, great. I just want to, maybe before I switch to the defense question, I think what we are saying here, if I may, is that if, let's say, we are 8 billion market today, let's assume that the 10% is 80 billion in 10 years' time, then there is a component there which is a local space market, which is the Indian space market. And what Subba was saying, there's an international space market. But the local space market, general to what you are saying, is underutilized because of true application of space at the state level, at the district level, at the thing, is still not fully understood. And that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean, the downstream benefits of space are now started reaching the common man, right? Otherwise, he was not aware what space was giving to him also, right? But now there is more and more demand. Not only the government agencies, but even the private sector wants space technologies. Everybody is not dealing in space, but they are into different, sectors. They also want space technology benefits to come to them. So when you make a perspective plan for 25 years, it should include the demands of the futuristic industry as well.
Yeah. And that brings me to my question on defense. How much of space is going to be used for national defense, both internal security and major wars?
So, for the armed forces, the three sectors where we require space is basically for strategic communications, for PNT, and for real-time or near real-time imagery, and basically change detection, right? So these are the three components which are absolutely necessary for any armed forces to survive in a modern battlefield, right? So, and the space industry must for these reasons, put us on a high priority as far as all developmental activities are concerned. We must be on the top priority for manufacturing of assets that we require. See, initially, everything, even for the defense, was planned by ISRO. We had some time back an integrated space cell in the integrated defense staff that we had. But now we have created an organization called the Director General of Defense Space Agency, DSA, which is a 2-star equivalent rank. And they look after the perspective plan of all the three services. Each service makes its own perspective plan, gives it to the DSA, who will coordinate, discuss with ISRO, discuss with DRDO, and then, crystallize this plan. And hopefully they will be doing it in the near future, because this agency has just been born. So let's look forward to this coming up with clear recommendations of what is required, so that the industry is left to no doubt that this is what they require.
Yeah. Anurag?
Sorry, just to add, in fact, during the DefExpo, Prime Minister released the defense space requirements. There were almost 72 challenges which was thrown up.
Yeah, 75 challenges.
Yeah, challenges which have been thrown up to the startup industry, also to the private industries to address. So this is a very good direction. Probably this is something which we need to see happen in other ministries as well.
Absolutely.
Defense has been always in the forefront of taking such initiatives, and that learning has to be deployed across.
Great. Anurag, one of the things General talked about is going forward, it's not just the current capabilities, but as we think about a 10% of global market share or 80 billion, there are new capabilities, new technologies, new ways. What is Thales's view of that new ways, and what will it bring to India?
Okay, so I'll take the framework that Mr. Radhakrishnan spoke about, upstream, midstream, and downstream, because that's an easier way to kind of do it. See, first of all, we are already seen as the launching hub for the globe. So we are well positioned that we need to do more of that. But in the upstream, if you talk about satellite manufacturing, a lot of that needs to happen here. And while we are doing satellite manufacturing through ISRO, and as the sector opens up, we need to be much better at nano and micro satellites, because that's where the future is. When you're talking about LEO constellations, you want high revisit Earth observation, you want flexible telecom. So I think that part, if we do, then we'll be able to make it, very global. And we have to be, also cognizant that whatever we are doing here should not be done with the myopic view of serving the India market. Space inherently is a very global sector. If you're developing an Earth observation constellation, you're not just going to take pictures around in and around India. You are going to take, can take pictures around the world, right? So why shouldn't you not offer services to other people? But then you have to be sure that what is the user need. You asked about defense, to Lieutenant General here, and he spoke about Earth observation. We need to get very near real-time situational awareness. So we need a constellation which can have 60 to 90-minute revisit, not a 5-6 hour or 1-2 day revisit, because things change on borders like every hour, 2 hours. So that's the key need. For that, we need smaller satellites. So that's kind of the correlation. If you talk about the midstream, I think when it comes to processing of the data, and specific big data, because it will be a pity if we have like a constellation in the sky which can click 10,000 pictures a day and we don't have enough resources to manage it. And this is not something a person will say can, click in images and do it. Again, sir talked about chain detection. We need that image processing, we need analytics which are probably AI based, so that, that processing can really mean something to someone. And then is really the downstream where we should start talking about packaging all of these capabilities, the ground and space infra, the processing platforms, in a way that is user friendly, in a way that is packaged for an end use. Take an example of insurance. Let's ask today that what portion of claim settlement input that they take is coming from space. The moment that goes from X%, which I don't know today, to maybe 20, 30, 40%, that's your case to go from 80 to 8 to 80 billion, because more and more insurance companies will either have assets or buy data services from companies to be able to be sure how and when to settle what amount of claims. So I think that's kind of the three-pronged way to summarize assets, the processing part, and the applications with which, and not just in the India view, but in a global view. Yeah.
I think I just looking at the kind of points that are emerging. I think one thing we should understand very clearly, the space activities when you're talking about, we are not talking about a big volume. You can leave alone the current things that are happening world over in terms of the constellation, where the satellites are more repetitive in nature. But if you just look back 5 years or maybe 10 years down the line, we used to always talk about a launcher, which is built and then we can maybe mass produce, but the launches are not that great. I think I'll keep aside even the Falcon for the moment. The number of launches that has been done from India itself, 5 to 6 numbers of PSLV, maybe 1 GSLV Mark III. What happens is when someone is building a bigger satellite, each having a life of something 8 to 10 years or 15 years, there is no need to have too many launches. So what happens is when a company is trying to build up an infrastructure for him to manufacture rockets, end of the day, he looks at what is the kind of volume that is given to him. You cannot have an expertise available in HAL, L&T or any other Godrej or an industry where you say, okay, you have the capability to build rockets, but I will give you an order for only 2 or 3 rockets because it doesn't make any big commercial sense to them. That is one side of it. Now, when you look at least there is, I would say, a repeatability of making the same hardware, processes are same. When you look at satellites, 5 years down the line where the concept of nano, micro never came to India and even globally, every satellite is a new animal by itself. So there is nothing like a production model which can be established where I say you order satellite number 1, I make 10 of that. No, every satellite is a new animal by itself. That is how the technology of building new payloads and the satellite bus resided within the organization. Now with the constellation coming up, you are seeing that globally the constellation coming up, the repeatability, the volume is increasing. Private people are ready to invest and build those satellites and manufacture it here. I would say in India, the startup ecosystem started emerging only some 3 years or maybe 5 years down the line. Be it for satellite manufacturing, be it for launch vehicles. At least the Indian industries have taken the courage to build the rockets on their own, which is privately outside the Indian industry. I would say compared to other private players, you just look at globally, how many of them are making the rockets privately? Other than Falcon, which has gone on a very large scale with a lot of support from the government, they are able to do it. But you look at the smaller scale of the startups globally, other than Rocket Labs or 1 or 2 companies, where they run from pillar to post to launch their rockets. I feel the people in India, the startup companies who are now at least taken a courage to build the rockets, have the wherewithal of all the ISRO facilities, be it solid motor rocket testing you want to do, you have facility in Shar available, go and fire your rocket motor and come back. Rockets are designed, built, you need to launch it, you have a spaceport which is being now enabled for them to go to Shar or maybe new launch site coming up. So I would still say the startups in India, as far as this high-tech upstream activities are concerned, they are very well placed to utilize the expertise, not only the facilities, but also the technology know-how of ISRO, which will be made available to them in terms of reviews, the designs and everything, so they are better placed. With the constellation coming up, I am sure when the volumes are more, a lot of private companies are going to come up because just telling I'll order one satellite for you, and after 6 years I'll come back for the second one, it doesn't make any commercial sense. So that is how the system is there. There was no need, I would say, 5 years down the line for anybody, private people, to come up and start this. With the opening of the space sector, I think industries have started realizing that they can get into this area. Because world over also this kind of, I would say, the perturbance has already happened because of this constellation concept coming up. Otherwise, all it was confined to agency. You know, if you look back 5 years down the line, globally everybody started building small rockets because Euroconsult or some of the consulting firm predicted every year you need to launch 450, 500 satellites, small satellite. That is the reason we also started building small satellite launch vehicle, SSLV. But you know, this launcher building is a long gestation time. And any country who takes up the rocket building has to ensure first and foremost where is the launch pads available for him. I think that I would say, all the companies in India are very lucky that they will be able to at least undertake this particular activity in India.
Actually, I'm going to break protocol by asking you a question related to this. So one of the things you said is that there are facilities available, there are capabilities available. But somehow the feedback we get, and I've also experienced it in a defense environment, that while it is available, the trust factor is missing. Now, I'm being provocative again.
Okay.
How do we make sure that a young startup feels trusted when it goes to big ISRO, or when a ISRO comes to private sector, feels that they are going to preserve my state secrets, or when the MOD comes to, or when the Space Department comes? How do we build this trust?
No, I think I will not agree with you, what you have really said with respect to utilizing the ISRO facility. Yes, I think maybe if you are referring 4 years, 5 years down the line, there were no companies who are coming forward to do this. Now, after the space sector reforms has happened, where the agency has been identified in space, who are the one. See, earlier what happened was, industry people did not know whom to approach to get access to the ISRO facility. Now there is a dedicated organization that has been created who can be approached, and then they have the list of facilities, expertise, which they can ask for, and they will enable them through the ISRO mechanism. So I don't think, even if you look at, I think today or yesterday also, Chairman was mentioning, the private people who are already building the rockets, they are already enabled to do the launches from our launch site. So I don't think there is any inhibition from ISRO side from doing that. I think maybe off late, I think the chemistry and the environment is absolutely apt for any of these people to get into the system of not only building rockets, but also satellite, but also technology. Everybody is very forthcoming to encourage the private space ecosystem in the country, I think maybe.
No, thanks. Yeah. I think that's right. So I think last 2-3 questions before I open it up for the audience. One of the things that we talk a lot about is being a space scientist was seen as very esoteric. But if we want to become a space nation, not just a space-faring nation, which is sending rockets and other things, but as I think, General, you indicated, that how do we make sure that citizens, the bureaucracy, the army, the navy, every establishment is aware of the possibilities of space, because that itself will drive more demand, right? How do we do that, Dr. Subba?
Yeah, the policy that was initiated by the government and announced by the government was, as you know, this is very clear. If they implement that manasa, vacha, karmana, then, as you said, the trust will be built, the private investments will come forward, and every Indian company look for the global opportunities also, besides the Indian opportunities. That's going to be the scenario. I mean, you can see any other area in the country, how it has grown over a period of time. When the liberalization was announced, reforms were announced in this respective sectors. In the same fashion that will happen in space sector also. I mean, I strongly believe that India can become the space nation, as you mentioned, in every aspect of that. And the private investments will flow into this. And the government did not spend in a single pie out of the taxpayers' money. The only thing is, allow the industry to do themselves. Like what's happening in the other industries, let them do that, enough.
Thank you. Raghavendra, I have a slightly different question. In terms of the message that we want to give to young leaders, you are creating a space industry within L&T. How do you motivate them? How do you get the next generation of space leaders? Previously, ISRO was a national champion. People, we saw Kiran Kumarji the other day, there are many others like Abdul Kalam who have devoted their lives to that. But today's modern manager needs a different vision. What do you tell them if you want to attract them to the space sector?
So I believe that if we can create an environment where all of the space activities can be done with a lot of freedom, like Sir brought out, that itself is a big motivation for a lot of people to come forward and do space activities. Second important thing is we need to build. In fact, if you look at the future space leaders should look at developing space capability at system of system level, which can happen if the co-development of these technologies can happen along with ISRO. So ISRO has been today a primary agency who has been developing these technologies. And there is a deficit. So if ISRO comes forward for, like Chairman brought out the other day, the next launch vehicle will be developed along with the industry. That's a big initiative which ISRO has taken, and I think that will motivate a lot of people to come forward and create those specialities in this particular industry which can go forward and become large business cases.
Thank you. General, do you have any message for a young leader wanting to come in?
No, before that, before I forget, I just wanted to make one point, and that is, you had also mentioned it about trust between the user and the, innovators. Okay. Now, certain requirements of the armed forces, there are two categories. One is militarization of space, and other is weaponization of space. Okay, and to take actions to prevent the enemy from hurting us, we have things like ASAT and all coming up. Okay, so there are certain projects which I think should be exclusively in the domain of ISRO or with a major corporate like an L&T, which is already trusted with defense secrets in a way, rather than opening it up to innovators at the startup level who will look for everything possible to get results. Okay. So this is a little concern which I have, and I request, sir, if you could elaborate on this a little bit.
Yeah, I think of late, you may be aware, after New Space India Limited got created, we have been mandated to do all commercial missions and also strategic missions of late. So we have been very closely associated with the DSA and other, I don't want to name the bodies here, for meeting the strategic needs also. Obviously, yes, I think when the requirement comes in terms of the capability of the satellite and the kind of features they look at it, India, the idea is basically when we are meeting such requirements, obviously we need to look at solutions which are within, because the purpose is slightly different. And the kind of capability and the type of satellite with the customer is looking at it, obviously the resource that lies is only within ISRO. Now, yes, I think now of late, when we say resources with ISRO, with respect to Earth observation or communication satellites, the designs that have been done in the past, which ISRO has been launching, is all bigger satellites. When you say EO satellites, they are in the range of 800, 1,000, 1,500 kilometers, both optical and radar. And when you talk about communication satellites, we are talking about 3 ton, 5 tons, 6 tons. But the things are changing now. What happens is the same Earth observation. If it is for surveillance or any other purpose, people are coming with the solutions where we can use even nanosatellites for that matter. Surely, I think that kind of technology innovation in terms of having nanosatellite is not evolving, not existing in the ISRO. So when the private companies come up with those kind of solutions, and if they are acceptable to the end user, obviously I think NSIL will be the one who will be interfacing with this and ensuring that those kind of systems are realized in the private industry market and fed to the department. And I think that is one big hand-holding that we'll be able to carry out, so that the startup systems or maybe satellites being made in India for this kind of users, which doesn't exist in ISRO. I will not say that it does not exist, so I'm going here. No. The things have changed. I do not know ISRO to be getting into the nanosatellite development. There are some industries who can deliver at a much faster rate. Why not we as a government company, PSU and the Department of Space, handhold them and give a solution to the department at the earliest possible time. This is what we are looking at it, basically.
Great.
I can now answer your question which you said.
Sorry.
You can use this. You can take this. Yeah, so, to to draw the full benefits of our space program, we need to educate, right? Educate the bureaucracy, right? The politicians to begin with, that is priority one, the bureaucracy, and then, lower down everybody, that what are the benefits which can accrue when you use space technology for governance, for deliverables that would otherwise be, very expensive. This is the most efficient way of delivery of services through space technology. And we have the capability now in the private sector also to do, develop these downstream applications. But this role, shouldn't NSIL, apart from commercializing this space activity, take on this task of educating everybody in the bureaucracy and making them, mandate them to use space technologies? That's the question, sir.
Yeah. I think this is one important step that we are taking in a very positive sense, like I was mentioning during my introductory talk also. When you talked about productionizing these rockets through the industry, we have been talking about for the last 8 to 10 years. I think many people would have been party to that. They have been hearing it's going to the industry. After we were created, we put a very bold step to see SIA to come out of this and put it to the industry. That is how we are trying to accelerate and educate the bureaucracy also, that yes, like for example, what I just mentioned, the nanosatellite capability which could be brought into India for meeting the strategic needs. We are the one who will be appraising them also, giving them confidence, yes, it could be done at the private industry. So I would just like to just raise one point about when you are talking about meeting either the strategic department needs or any needs for that matter, let us not always look at the big brothers. Like, you mentioned suddenly L&T, you will say HAL and Godrej, not necessarily. I think if you look at it, then in that case, I will say globally, you have to only look for Airbus, Thales, and some of the people. Let us not have that kind of mindset. There are some companies, private, chota or bada, whatever it is, if they have the capability, look at it in a most unbiased way, if they are able to deliver, because we are there to, along with ISRO, to validate the products, the quality and the capability of that particular product, then only we are going to accept it. We are not going to just like that, somebody builds, take it and give it to the user. No. That's what I'm just trying to say.
I'm not saying big brothers only, but even a consortium of MSMEs. You've used this approach earlier as well. That you have, 3 or 4 reliable MSMEs.
Exactly.
And put them, and they're together, in it for this, because the startups are, despite the zeal that they have, they are still in the infancy.
I fully agree with you.
They need to stabilize. Once you are satisfied of their stability and credibility, then only do you entrust larger projects.
Exactly. I fully agree with you. I think this is one of the very classic example we took, moment we gave the advertisement for PSLE production to industry. I don't want to name the companies. There are people who would not have known what a rocket is. They have said we are going to build it. But we have a process through which we go through EOI process, RFP, shortlist, see the capability and ensure that the best in the business gets the deal. I think we will follow that culture even when it comes to satellites. Unless the manufacturers are fully qualified and trusted, we are not going to take them on board. I think that will be our responsibility.
So last question on the panel to Anurag. Anurag, how do you break this log jam? Small company, nimble, but not necessarily fully aware and maybe unstable at times. And large companies, including Thales. How does Thales deal with this situation?
So, we are working with Indian startups very closely already, in the space domain and other domains, because we see them to be very agile. We see them to be very ambitious. And at the same time, we see scope for us to contribute to their business and in turn, how we can do things together. So I think, first of all, it's very important for us to demystify space for a lot of people, whether you're into the game or you're not into the game. In fact, I just addressed a room full of 200 students from various engineering colleges. That was the most difficult audience to be in there. They're very curious and they're not polite. They'll ask you difficult questions. So, so I'll draw upon some of the experiences there. I felt the need to demystify because they were very much, embezzled by the space. It's very great, but they didn't know what to do, where to go. The other thing was when I looked at certain, people there who were wanting to start up, I felt they're trying to be everything to everyone. And I tried to bring some focus to say, okay, please decide. And I gave examples of some of the Indian startups. There is a company making new age satellite propulsion. There is a company talking about an infrastructure approach to space situational awareness. So that's very specific, solving a problem, in a way, and then really looking at the business case of what you're trying to do. And I think like Raghavendra said, where's the money? The moment you're talking about this journey, you're very sure what will you be to whom, what's your business model, what's the business case, and the moment that's sorted, investments will follow, whether it's public investment, private investment, and you'll be sure, your customers will be sure what you're trying to offer to them. And I think that could be a great recipe. And as Thales, we are not keen that we become primes. We are committed to Make in India. We have a joint venture with Bharat Electronics. We're happy for them to be the prime. We're happy to be an Indian startup to be the prime. So whatever it takes to put the right technology, right solution in the framework that the country allows, a lot of large companies like us will be happy to do it. But I think there are already enabling structures. We should not wait for absolute clarity for that to happen. And it's our duty of care to, make certain these things happen.
Great. So with those words, I'm going to open it up for any questions from the audience. I think the two phrases that Anurag used, by the way, both of us are from IIT Delhi. He's a few years junior to me. But is the curious and impolite. So we don't mind both.
Good afternoon. I am Ramaraju from TEC Department of Telecom. We do standardization. I have put observation that with advent of the 5G services and the there are a lot of opportunity in communication field, which is coming technology in 5G and 5G advanced and 6G also, as visualized many transport service through satellite. And also the quantum communication also through space, precious communication, disaster management, and seamless communication. And one of the 5G big change is SLA, more than 99% reliability, which can be met only the alternative communication through satellite. And also critical, now it is a 1/3, even the fiberization is 1/3 in the country, maybe target 5 years is 2/3, but still a lot of gap is there for transportation network, and the many component manufacturing for optical devices very much critical for the space communication. How the industry is looking at these opportunities as a private as well as ISRO? How the strategy for the next 5 years?
Telecom 5G part of it. See, there is a kind of a standardization processes of qualifying process for the space also onto that. And for example, when we deal with any subsystem manufacturing or the satellite integration or satellite testing, or launch, whatever, we have our own standards of doing that. Those standards are derived using the NASA standards and ESA standards. We developed our own standards called PAX 300 standards on that. So they will be, of course, upgraded periodically, etc. That happens on that. With the standard, there's a lesson, the failure rate in the space program is very less. Practically tends to 0. The reason being that we go to the stringent process of the standards, implementation processes, qualifying the everything in that. So when it comes to telecom related standards applicability to this, perhaps with the, I'm not very sure how it is, when you say 5G comes up, a particular satellites are to work with the 5G on the downstream side, perhaps some amendment to be done to our standards also in order to meet that ground requirement. Could be.
The standards is concerned is different, I agree, the different standards. In telecom, we follow the IEC standards, ISO IEC, as well as ITU standards, as well as IEEE standards. There are many standards each application, because the IETF standard is, depends on the application. There have been ITC standards. There like that in India also we have very few modified, but otherwise is adopted same standards. But space is concerned, as you said, is correct. Not the standards, the business which is potential is in the future. How the industry is looking for to fill the gap as to promote India as a hub for the whatever the vision of our government.
So for the sake of time, can I request you to take this with the panelists shortly after this? But it's a good question. Any other questions? We are not going to give up till we have 2 more questions. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ravit from Swedish Space. I mean, I just want to get a context of the role. I understand NSIL being the enabler and also, I would say, the commercial arm. But I mean, I want to just understand, maybe it's unclear to me, maybe it's already cleared in another session, but let's say you're saying if you have the armed force wanting something strategic, they come to NSIL. NSIL could have the choice of going to, like you're saying, the bigger players like L&T, they could go to ISRO, they could go to the smaller space companies, but those decisions, that process of evaluation that is ongoing, if I understand correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, those are done today by NSIL and ISRO together. So is that something that will finally be NSIL by itself, or is that something that NSIL and ISRO will still handhold, and then maybe, is there any bias that goes towards ISRO for these kind of decisions?
No, I think maybe with respect to your question on the strategic, I think let us not discuss it very openly here. What I would like to say is, yes, I think we are the commercial arm, but now we also are the satellite operators when it comes to communication satellite. You know, we have almost 10 which Government of India has transferred from ISRO back to for us to NSIL. We have built our own communication satellite, GSAT-24, which we launched. So we fully own it. So today, I would say in our kitty, we have 11 communication satellites which are being owned and operated by us, where the capacity is given. And we also have the mandate to replenish this in the area of communication side. In the area of Earth observation, we are, again, if the user demand is there, I think I would say the lead manufacturer of satellites will be ISRO. There is no doubt on that. But wherever the requirement comes, when the capability doesn't exist, say for example, some of the user is asking NSIL to give a in-orbit delivery of some particular communication satellite or EO satellites where the capability doesn't exist, somewhere else the capability is existing. NSIL would like to explore the opportunity of using that capability. It will be only in the area of satellites, you know, because it is beyond doubt as far as the launcher capability is concerned. We have the entire fleet of launchers. So we are not going to look at any of those options of seeking the launches unless the capability of our vehicle doesn't cater to lifting that particular satellite. So in the area of satellite building, if there are better solutions commercially and technically, better solutions exist, NSIL will be interfacing with them to realize the satellite, and wherever the help of ISRO is required in terms of reviewing or validating or qualifying, we will be doing that. Because we are the front end of them under the same ministry department, so we have all access to get the expertise available with them. So I think beyond this, I will not like to really answer that question, so let us not discuss that strategic related aspects here at this point.
Okay, one last question, anyone?
Yeah, hi, my name is Saurabh Kapil. I'm part of the space practice in PwC. So I have a question for Lieutenant General. You commented that the downstream side or the application side and the ministries and the end users do not have the maturity right now to be able to, or largely to understand the spatial data. So now, obviously, that is the customer which is going to drive the demand on the upstream side. Now, if you're looking at, as a nation for the next 25 years, if you were to place some strategic bets, where would they be? Should they be on the upstream side, which includes satellite manufacturing, launch vehicle, or should they be on the downstream side?
Yes, straight away on the downstream side, because on the upstream side, we have been explained that we already have most of the capabilities in the upstream and the midstream as well. Just an interesting thing, you know, about just recently the Department of Space has issued an expression of interest asking for management consultancies like yours to estimate the socio-economic effect of the Indian space program. And I suppose it means from 1969 onwards. And it has given various sectors, it has given various metrics where they, you know, exactly how you're going to sort of assess that. So that itself, you know, is showing that there is not enough, you know, knowledge about what has been given to society through our, you know, extremely brilliant space program. So that's something I just wanted to add.
So may I take this forward? Yeah, don't mind. Okay, there are two parts of the question I would like to answer that. Number one is how to mandate downstream side. I'll just draw another parallel from the World Bank funded projects in India. On the spatial databases, anything related to spatial activity related, that means anything land, water, environment side, any World Bank related projects, clearly they mandate that the satellite data is to be used. And they specifically mention IRS data to be used. So naturally, when the study is being made, that's being supported, that will be done automatically by using the satellite data. Unfortunately, when the similar things are happening in this country, though they started in the beginning, somewhere we lost the ground in between. That mandating is not happening in that. When I computed my original figures, when I left my job and looking at this part of it, for example, any planning purpose, normally we use a Survey of India topographic sheets. And all the topographic sheets of Survey of India are very old, 10 years, 15 years old topo sheets. For example, you want to know a particular, say, river, even the correct positions of these various things are the part of it, they become absolutely obsolete on that. So for planning, take an example of irrigation projects. The satellite data is extremely useful on that, because it gives you today's situation on the ground. So we expected that if the satellite data used in the planning purposes to various other departments, even 1% of that is used for the remote sensing applications area. That itself runs 1% of the total figure, what amount is being spent on the agriculture, irrigation, water sources, what are various departments part of it. That itself is a huge figure is coming up on that. But the government of India did not mandate that it should be used. Wherever somebody has a knowledge, they are using it. Now, at the same time, it is very difficult to educate the bureaucrats, because the secretary will be there for a year or two, then he retires, goes away, somebody else comes it up. It's impossible to do that part. It has to be mandated by Government of India by a process by the Niti Aayog. Perhaps the PwC, when you look into various recommendations, I think we should make that kind of recommendation on that. That's number one. The second point is, only my presumption again, why Department of Space asks for the impact of that. Normally, Government of India is looking for impact of any scheme that is being implemented in the country. What is the benefits that have been accrued on that, etc. Okay? From that angle, perhaps Department of Space also must ask for that. I also draw another, example from this, from other things. I think PwC or somebody has made a study earlier that, the Indian contribution to the space economy is only 2% in India. But I don't know how the 2% figures are arrived. But I am of the view that it's not 2%, it's much more than that. Why? I'll tell you for an example. We conducted the groundwater potential zone identification throughout the country. We also did the country mapping of the entire forest area in the country. I also identified the drought-prone areas in the country. Like this, there are various mission projects which Department of Space, ISR, was conducted earlier, for which most of the industry is part of that also under that. For example, when a groundwater portion zone is identified, when the farmers, the bore wells have been dug using that information, and the benefit is accrued to the farmers, whatever, irrigation, whatever, drinking water purpose, how do you compute this impact on the space economy? Do you look at the cost of the satellite imagery alone, or you look at the derivative of that benefit? I'm sure the derivative of such kind of benefits have not been done. Because it is only in India, I must tell you very confidently, proudly, that satellite data has been extensively used, was used by ISRO and its allied services in the country. Nobody else. For example, I can give you another example. Sorry, so don't mind, another 1 minute. Okay. The soil mapping, for example, soil mapping is used. That's what the Government of India now wanted, the soil cards to be given to every farmer. When they identify the soil and the type of soil, then from there we derive soil capability, soil irrigability, soil usability. There are various components onto that part, okay, from soils, okay? Based upon that, the type of crop to be grown or the type of amount of water that is required to that is to be given on that. These experiments have been done, extensively been used in the country on that. So impact of this, how do you compute? I don't think anybody has computed that. Similarly, we identified the forest areas and where the forest is decreasing, where the forest is to be grown further, and how do you enable the tribals to potentially protect their areas in the forest area, because their livelihood also depends upon that. So therefore, identification, training, and implementation, all these processes have been implemented. But how do we say, how is the impact of this into the space economy? So therefore, there is a direct impact, there is an indirect impact. Perhaps that intangible is to be measured. Perhaps that's what needs to be done. And if PwC, by any chance, getting into that kind of study, please, I would like to be part of that.
No, that's great. I think it's a very good way to end the discussion, and I'll hand it over to the chair. But I just want to pick up on your comment. Firstly, the 2% is not about GDP. The 2% is of the global market. So it's about the global space market, which is 368 odd billion. And I think you're absolutely right. If we say that that is going to be 10% of the global market, which is 80 billion, then what you're alluding to, that the impact on the economy could be at least 4 or 5 times that. So if, let's say, just for a minute, let's say it's 5 times that, it's 400 billion, then you are arguing, and I think you have some facts behind, you have some force behind it, is that if we are a 10 trillion economy and 400 billion is because of space, then it's a significant contribution. And I think if we tell this to the Joe public, to the bureaucrat, to the young student, to the others, then that'll make them sit up and think about space, as opposed to saying that 2% is making satellite and electronic equipment. That's the point you're making. And that's a beautiful point to end this debate. I'd like to thank everyone for being here. I'd like to first thank everyone to come here and be part of this very lively debate. If I was slightly provocative, my apologies. I'd like to hand it over to the chair to make his summing remarks and a thank you note.
Thank you very much, Shashank. I think as far as the topic of today's discussion of leveraging industry base for national development, I'm sure all the panelists here have made justice to the kind of debate we had, starting from the upstream. Our strength being upstream, we keep always talking about upstream. I think we would have had somebody in the downstream side also who would have thrown more light. I think all the people here are mostly in the upstream segments. It would have been much more, I think, eventful. Anyway, I thank Dr. Subba Rao, Mr. Raghavendra, Shashank, Lieutenant General Chandele, and Mr. Anurag for giving their valuable insights into today's topic of discussion. I think we'll keep continuing our discussion. It's not only this fora we need to exchange. I think we can always discuss in the coming weeks, months, and want to assure everybody here, anything you need to look for doing any commercial space business or anything, I think please reach out to New Space India Limited. We'll be the first people to help you out in whether you have to get access to ISRO facilities, anything or any concepts you have with you, which can be really good for the governmental projects or even for our own projects. We'll be happy to interact and have partnership with you to ensure that the space economy in the country grows multifold, what has been the vision of the Government of India also. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, with that, we close the proceedings of this session.